The world is full of mysteries. Some we can explain through logic and reason, but others defy explanation. Tonight we'll delve into three such mysteries, stories that revolve around an object as ordinary as it is ancient, the chessboard. These aren't just any chessboards, these are vessels of something else, something that moves the pieces with unseen hands. These tales come from those who dared to challenge the unknown, who dared to play against the unseen. In an old abandoned mansion, a chessboard sat untouched for decades, until one night the pieces began to move on their own. The Blackwood mansion stood on a windswept hill overlooking the stormy Atlantic. Locals whispered of the family that once resided there, of their sudden disappearance, and of the strange occurrences that followed. Most of these stories involved the Grand Library, specifically the chessboard that sat perpetually set up in front of the fireplace. One night, a group of teenagers, fueled by teenage arrogance and cheap beer, decided to explore the abandoned mansion. They were there for thrills, for bragging rights, for a good story to tell. They found more than they bargained for. The mansion was dark, lit only by the occasional flash of lightning through the boarded-up windows. The air was heavy with the scent of decay and the weight of unseen eyes. The teenagers made their way through the darkened halls, their laughter echoing unnaturally loud in the silence. They found the library, its shelves still lined with dusty tomes, the fireplace cold and empty. And there in the center of the room lay the chessboard. The pieces were made of ivory, intricately carved, and they stood poised on the board as if frozen in the middle of a game. One of the teenagers, a cocky boy named Jake, stepped forward. He picked up a white pawn, turning it over in his hands. "Looks like someone left in a hurry," he said, his voice echoing in the silence. He placed the pawn back on the board, a move that would seal their fate. A low groan echoed through the room and the teenagers froze. They looked at each other, their eyes wide with fear. The groan came again, this time louder, and it seemed to be coming from the fireplace. Suddenly the chessboard came alive. The pieces began to move, gliding across the board with an eerie grace. The teenagers watched in horror as the pieces moved, seemingly of their own accord. The game was fast-paced, aggressive. The black pieces, controlled by an unseen hand, seemed to anticipate the teenagers' every move. Panic set in. The teenagers tried to leave, but the door slammed shut, the sound echoing like a death knell. The temperature in the room plummeted, and the air grew thick with the smell of ozone. The chessboard pulsed with an eerie light, and the pieces moved faster, the sound of ivory clicking against wood, the only sound in the room. Then, as quickly as it began, it stopped. The pieces were still. The teenagers fled the mansion, never to return. In a quaint antique shop, a cursed chess set was discovered. Every night the pieces would rearrange themselves as if playing a game with an unseen opponent. The antique shop was nestled on a quiet street, tucked between a bakery and a bookstore. Its windows were filled with curious objects, old clocks, chipped china dolls, and dusty books. It was the kind of place that beckoned collectors and the curious, promising treasures from a forgotten time. One day the owner, Mr. Hawthorne, received a new shipment. Among the usual assortment of antiques was a chess set, unlike any he had ever seen. The board was made of dark, polished wood, almost black, inlaid with silver and bone. The pieces were exquisite, carved from onyx and ivory, each one a miniature work of art. The detail was incredible, but there was something about the set that made Mr. Hawthorne uneasy. He felt a cold shiver run down his spine every time he touched it. He decided to display the chess set in his shop window, hoping to attract a buyer. He carefully arranged the pieces, setting them up for a game. He locked up for the night, unaware of the dark game he had just set in motion. That night, the real game began. Unseen by any eyes, the pieces on the chessboard began to move. They glided across the board, their movements fluid and silent, as if controlled by an invisible hand. The game was a silent ballet of death, played out in the darkness of the antique shop. The next morning, Mr. Hawthorne arrived to find the chessboard in disarray. The pieces were scattered across the board, as if a game had been interrupted mid-play. He assumed it was vandals, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something else was at play. He meticulously rearranged the pieces, returning them to their original positions. That night he decided to stay late, hiding in the back of the shop, watching the chessboard through a crack in the door. He didn't have to wait long. Just after midnight, the pieces began to move again. Mr. Hawthorne watched in horror as the pieces moved with a life of their own, their movements precise and deliberate. He realized then that the chess set was cursed, playing a game with an unseen opponent, perhaps even the ghost of its previous owner. Terrified, Mr. Hawthorne decided to get rid of the chess set. He tried to give it away, but no one would take it. He tried to sell it, but no one would buy it. The chess set, it seemed, was his burden to bear. One day, a mysterious woman entered the shop. She was tall and elegant, with piercing green eyes and a knowing smile. She was drawn to the chess set, her fingers tracing the intricate carvings on the pieces. "This set," she said, her voice a husky whisper, "it holds a powerful magic, a dangerous magic." Mr. Hawthorne, desperate, confided in the woman, telling her about the strange occurrences. The woman listened intently, her smile never wavering. "I can help you," she said, her voice barely audible above the ticking of the antique clocks. "But it will come at a price." Mr. Hawthorne, desperate to be rid of the cursed chess set, agreed to the woman's price. He didn't know what it was, but he didn't care. He just wanted the chess set gone. The woman took the chess set, her fingers lingering on the Black Queen for a moment. She turned to Mr. Hawthorne, her green eyes boring into his. "The game is not over," she said, her voice a chilling whisper. "It has just begun." And with that, she vanished into thin air, leaving Mr. Hawthorne alone in his shop, the silence deafening. Chapter 3: The Ghostly Chess Game in the Library. In a quiet, dusty library, a ghostly chess game would unfold every midnight. The spectral players would move the pieces with an unseen hand, leaving the living witnesses in sheer terror. The town library was a place of quiet contemplation, a sanctuary for scholars and bookworms. Its shelves were lined with countless volumes, each one a portal to another world. But within its hallowed halls, a secret lay hidden, a secret that whispered of a time when the library was more than just a repository of knowledge. It was a place where the veil between the living and the dead was thin, where the echoes of the past lingered in the present. The haunting began subtly. Books would be found slightly out of place, their pages left open as if someone had just been reading them. Footsteps would echo through the empty stacks at night, their rhythm slow and deliberate. But it was the chessboard that truly signaled that something was amiss. The chessboard was an antique, donated to the library by the family of a prominent judge who had passed away many years ago. It was made of mahogany and ivory, and the pieces were intricately carved with the faces of medieval kings and queens. It sat on a small table in the corner of the library, a silent sentinel to a bygone era. At first, the staff dismissed the strange occurrences as pranks or perhaps the work of overactive imaginations. But as the events escalated, their skepticism gave way to fear. One night, a young librarian named Sarah was working late, catching up on some paperwork. The library was empty, the silence broken only by the soft hum of the fluorescent lights. As she passed by the chessboard, she noticed something strange. The pieces had been moved. She distinctly remembered setting up the board in a classic King's Gambit opening, but now the pieces were arranged in a completely different formation. She shook her head, attributing it to fatigue, and rearranged the pieces back to their original positions. She went back to her work, but a nagging feeling of unease kept her from concentrating. She glanced up at the clock, and her heart skipped a beat. It was midnight. As the clock chimed 12 times, the library was plunged into darkness. A cold wind swept through the stacks, rustling the pages of the books. Sarah fumbled for her phone, her hand trembling as she turned on the flashlight. As her eyes adjusted to the darkness, she gasped. 2 figures, shimmering like heat haze, were seated at the chessboard. They were playing a game, their spectral fingers gliding over the pieces. Sarah watched in terror as the game unfolded, the pieces moving with an eerie grace. She couldn't make out the faces of the players, but she could feel their eyes on her, cold and ancient. She wanted to scream, to run, but she was paralyzed with fear. The game reached its climax, and the ghostly players moved their final pieces. The Black King fell, defeated. The chessboard, a symbol of strategy, intellect, and competition, takes on a whole new meaning when it becomes the playing field for the supernatural. These stories, whether you believe them or not, serve as a chilling reminder that some mysteries are best left unsolved. If you enjoyed these tales of haunted chessboards and the unseen players who control them, be sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more explorations into the dark corners of our world. And if you have a story of your own, a chilling encounter with a game that took on a life of its own, share it in the comments below.